Hey everybody, we are here. We were supposed to have three esteemed guests, but one of them, Chaz, who everybody knows Chaz, has a very bad fever and is pretty sick. So we kicked him out because we didn't also want to get sick. But I'm pumped to have Justin and Prince here to talk about tariffs, AI, building in a time of cholera. I first want to start with proper introductions of the two of you. Prince, the less successful, exciting guest. I want to start with you. Give us your background, man. I know it, but share and we'll kind of dig in from there.
Awesome. Thanks for having us, Aaron. Excited to do this. The quick kind of background for everyone is my name is Prince. Most recently was the founder and CEO of a company called Factored Quality in and around the digital supply chain space. Just kind of winding it back though for a second. By background, I was originally a mechanical and aerospace engineer. Started my career working on building rockets over at NASA and ended up falling into the wonderful world of manufacturing. I was based in Cleveland, Ohio, which Aaron, I know you have the greatest city on earth, and was working in the aerospace industry over there and fell into the world of manufacturing and procurement and always had an itch to go and start something and build something new. So ended up leaving to originally start a company called Workbench. The entire vision and goal of this company, Workbench, was to build a collaborative platform for buyers and suppliers in the supply chain to collaborate on product development and on bringing new products to market. We originally focused on the aerospace industry, ended up falling into the world of consumer goods, and through that, actually through Chaz, happened to meet Justin. This would have been back in 2019, 2020. So I guess now over 5 years ago. So got a chance to meet Justin and his longtime business partner, Lucas Lappy, as they were building Doris Dev. We ended up collaborating a bunch and kind of, through the process of collaborating, we ended up realizing that there was a bigger, perhaps more interesting opportunity to take a lot of what we had built with Workbench, combine it with parts of what Justin had built over at Doris Dev, and turn it into what ultimately became Factored Quality. And so from 2021 through 2025, Justin, Lucas, myself, and a team that we had built, we built Factored Quality to do what Flexport did for freight, which was to build a digital freight forwarder. We were doing for a different part of the supply chain around all things quality, testing, and compliance. And so we can get deeper into what that means and how that's relevant. But we had the fortune of scaling the business and the team over the last 4 years, scaled it to 120 plus brands, from the Canopies of the world to Dr. Squatch, The Honest Company, Brooklinen, Everlane, Frida Baby. We consider to all be kind of marquee customers. And in late 2024, Factored Quality was acquired by another business in and around the commerce enablement supply chain space called Pietra, which was a product sourcing marketplace for the consumer goods industry. So Factored Quality now sits within Pietra, run Factored Quality, run a bunch of other parts of the Pietra business as well. So yeah, excited to be on.
That was great. Justin, by the way, I think Prince is actually the most successful, so we'll give you and I a shot next. But
Far from.
Prince, thank you. That was awesome.
I'm glad that you kicked off.
That's right.
And I guess to follow suit in Prince's shadows, Aaron, thanks for having us on. Always fun to chat. Supply chain, new brand incubation, and especially tariffs at present. So happy to be here. That last bit was very sarcastic. My background's been in developing, commercializing, launching, and scaling consumer goods for the last 15 years. I'm currently co-founder and president of Canopy, which is a beauty wellness brand, most notably selling humidifiers and filtered shower products into a few different categories, but focused on beauty and new parent. And that brand was actually incubated out of Doris Dev, which, as Prince mentioned, is a separate business that I started with a partner almost 8+ years ago, which is a design, engineering, and manufacturing service business based in New York and in Hong Kong that helps predominantly early stage companies, founders, startups take ideas in the physical consumer goods world and turn them into physical products and set up their supply chains for scale. And prior to that, and my background before then was working in manufacturing and manufacturing operations and supply chain operations. I spent a couple of years living in Asia, living in Hong Kong, traveling all over China and Southeast Asia, finding factory partners and setting up production lines for all different types of consumer goods. And out of that experience ended up starting what became Doris Dev. And since then, Doris Dev has evolved and has done a ton of work in the design, engineering, and manufacturing space globally. But what's been really interesting and exciting is what we built with Doris Dev with regards to being a service partner and across different touch points of creating new products and setting up and managing supply chains. We've then used that to incubate new ventures. So I was very fortunate to meet Prince back in 2019 when he was working on Workbench and helped steer him in the right direction, which ultimately was setting up and scaling this digital first quality control management platform. And that came out of work that we were doing on the supply chain operations side at Doris Dev, helping to manage quality control for a handful of brands. And then we've also worked on incubating our own brands out of Doris Dev. So most notably, that's Canopy, which we launched in 2020. And has scaled really, considerably since then. Doris Dev continues to grow and evolve as a service partner in the consumer goods ecosystem with a ton of different brand partners across all categories, which is really interesting to get exposure and experience, working in different categories. But we'll continue to look at opportunistically incubating and launching new brands out of Doris Dev as well in the future.
I mean, so many follow-ups for both of you, but Justin, I just want to start right now. How do you think about splitting your time and how quickly does that change as I don't want to go into the tariffs, but as the world changes, are you kind of flexing in and out or do you have a pretty clear routine and a rhythm right now?
Yeah, I think today, since the beginning of this year, I've been really solely focused on Canopy. Canopy has hit a scale that just requires a ton of attention and bandwidth. And so I've been, focused my energy and attention really there on making sure we're continuing to grow and maintain this trajectory that we've set ourselves on, over the last few years. And over the last few years, what's happened and evolved with kind of the other businesses is there have been folks, leaders in place that have grown and evolved in each of their respective functions that have leaned in to take ownership of kind of the day-to-day work and strategic, initiatives to help lead and scale the businesses. So I've been very lucky specifically with Doris Dev, 3 of the team members have moved into partner roles at the business and are leading all of the work in day-to-day operations. What that means, though, is today, as I'm focused a lot of my attention and energy on what's going on with tariffs, work that I'm doing with Canopy translates into strategies or things that we can think about and leverage at Doris Dev, and also vice versa. There's a ton of work that's going on with our team, both in New York and in Hong Kong, that we can leverage to unlock certain paths for Canopy. So it ends up being a very symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways. And generally what I would say is, I've prioritized my bandwidth and attention on things where I can have the most impact based off of what's going on. And then I would say more selfishly where I'm getting more of my energy from. So what's energizing me, day to day. And so I think that the twofold of that means, I do get to ebb and flow, but, I would say now I'm very much focused on keeping Canopy on this trajectory that we've set ourselves out on.
I love it. Thank you. Prince, I want to turn to you for a minute and I want to jump in on tariffs, specifically starting with you because you see this across decisions that a lot of brands are taking. Obviously I know the factor quality story and all the brands you've listed, and Pietra obviously is a different set as well. Tariffs happened a couple months ago. This is starting to happen. It's changing. Now there's the stay for 90 days, 85 days, whatever's left, right? And we'll see. What are big operational decisions that have started to take place? Justin, I want you to chime in as quickly as you want to, but Prince, if you can kind of open this up, please.
Yeah, totally, man. I think the first kind of big question that everyone is struggling with or grasping with is this question of, is this truly a art of the deal that our president is trying to do, or is this a true long-term decision that's happening, and should it be planned around it? The reason that that's so important is because unlike software, as all of us on this call know, manufacturing cannot be spun up and down with the click of a few buttons, right? If you're making a injection molded product, the amount of time it takes just to spin up tooling and to spin up a new facility to make your product, right? I think AirPods are CNC machined, if I'm not mistaken, but Just think about any of these products around you. Manufacturing does not just spin up and does not just spin down. And so it takes a considerable amount of time. If you're a brand looking to resource from a different supplier to stand up that production line, to go through auditing the factory, to go through sampling and production development, and everything up until that first purchase order is actually placed. And so this is the biggest question that a lot of brands are trying to think about. From what I've seen and heard, there's kind of three distinct buckets that brands are falling into. The first bucket is brands that are building, let's call it premium products with higher gross margins and have the ability to just eat the incremental cost of, the tariffs and additional duties that are being placed on the product. And the juice isn't worth the squeeze to be able to move production, right? So that's kind of the first bucket. The second bucket is lower gross margin products, typically in commodity markets. And what I've seen and observed is even there, this bifurcates into two kind of decision trees. One is a set of products where the overall price of that commodity product, everyone is expecting to be inflated over time as the cost to produce wallets, phone cases, mugs, hats just generally increases. And then there's another subsect where individual brands will either make decisions to pass on that end cost to customers or just to eat the gross margin and just operate at even lower gross margins, or in some cases not be able to operate at all. So that's kind of the second big, bucket I've been seeing. And then the third big bucket is brands that have done well enough over the last, let's call it 7 to 10 years, and have enough cash on their balance sheet to actually think about investing in setting up and standing up their own production lines. And so without naming names, Justin and I have a bunch of friends in and around spaces like cookware, for example, where there's only so many cookware suppliers in the world that can manufacture across different cookware categories, from pots to pans to knives. And there's a number of brands that, I've spoken to literally this week that have said, look, I think we're actually at the point where we have enough cash on the balance sheet that it makes sense to either buy ourselves or in joint venture with other brands or with manufacturers domestically in the US, just stand up production ourselves. So those are kind of the three big structural buckets I'm seeing about how people are responding to some of this tariff stuff. Justin, do you agree, or would you feel differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that we're seeing. I'm seeing, as well. I think it is very category or sector dependent too, right? I think there's certain categories where the intent with these tariffs is to try and put a pressure on moving manufacturing back onshore, nearshore. And the reality though is that for a lot of categories, for a lot of manufacturing categories, the infrastructure is just not here. There's no realistic way of turning on a dime, turning manufacturing back on in electronics assembly or injection molding parts where we're competing with costs and infrastructure that's just so aggressively priced outside of this country. So I think the intent of trying to move stuff back on shore is I get it makes it we understand it, it's just not realistic. And so what it's forced for a lot of folks in other categories to look is just look elsewhere. And even elsewhere the infrastructure just has not been set up. We've spent the last 18 months to 2 years looking at options outside of China because we knew that this was going to be coming eventually. And so we had been making headway into finding partners in Southeast Asia that could support some of the injection molded parts and maybe electronics assembly and things like that. But it wasn't moving, quickly. And we weren't finding the same costing, we weren't finding the same production reliability. And in the last 2 weeks, essentially what's happened is this has just served as an accelerant for everybody, for all of the work that had been happening to really just kind of push things through. And so now it feels like we're rushing on things that we had been working on slowly. And ultimately, I would say I would categorize it into two different approaches. There's kind of our short-term approach and then our long-term purview. And I think to what Prince said earlier, there's, it's hard to plan for both of them because we're not totally sure what is going to stick. or what the impact is going to be long term. And so we're taking on this bifurcated approach for both kind of short term and long term. And with short term, it's this, hey, we're rushing to figure out near term or short term solutions outside of China within the region that we can turn on and figure out what can scale and ramp. And long term, it's, hey, are we setting up fully outside of China, which is a position that we're taking for most of our production needs, or are we setting up redundancies both in China and outside of China to just see how things play out? And the answer is we're doing like 100 things at once to cover our bases, which I think a lot of brands are trying to do. And it's just really hard because there's nothing definitive at the moment, right? We don't know what's actually sticking. We don't know where the numbers are going to land. We don't know where we should be investing capital, energy. And so it's just, it makes things really, really challenging.
Are you finding a slowdown in consumer demand as well, given like uncertainty in the economy that's like exacerbating, or is that depends on the brand?
I think it depends on the category too. I think actually near term, we've seen, interestingly, an uptick in certain things. On the Doris Dev side, we've seen some brands that have like capitalized on essentially, spurring customers to buy product before the tariff impact takes hold. And so that's tariff sales. We're fire sales, but get your product before we see the 150% impact in stores. And so we're seeing kind of a short-term uptick. I think my expectation though is that come June, in the next 6 weeks, we're going to start seeing the retailers and the brands really have to pass through cost increases onto customers. And so in the next 6 weeks, my expectation is that we're going to see consumer demand, fall off a cliff. And then following that, we're going to see a lot of the retailers, brands, the economy, kind of the effect of that take hold, especially as we look at Q2 earnings reports from, some of these folks and people finally realizing, the impact of all of these changes. It's gonna take a few weeks for actual consumers to digest all of it.
It was interesting. I was talking to a tech founder the other day who serves this ecosystem, and his point was everybody's gonna have good earnings or better than expected, and they're all gonna downplay what's gonna happen in the next couple quarters, and so everybody's gonna get freaked out, and it's just gonna the markets are gonna dry up in terms of at least private capital, specifically because everybody will just project it downwards. Prince, jump in, please.
Feel free to stop me if this is getting too deep in the weeds. But Justin, question for you here, right? So Canopy sells omni-channel across direct to consumer, across retail. I think Target, Sephora, a few other different retailers, right?
Yeah.
What does your ability to change retail price look like? Like obviously on D2C you can adjust up and down, but are you fixed into annual retail pricing with the POs that Target, Walmart are placing, or Target, Sephora are placing to you guys?
It's a great question. So these are live conversations that are happening now with our merchant partners. Legally, the contract isn't locked in with pricing. So on paper, there's flex. The reality, though, is that everybody's very price sensitive, and our retail partners are beholden to hit, or the merchants, I should say, are beholden to hit certain margin constraints. And so it's a conversation that will happen depending on where things land on the impact. So, basically it's always a partnership across any type of relationship. What that means is the retailers are expecting the brand Canopy to go do the legwork to figure out how to minimize impact. So we're doing all of that work. We're negotiating, hey, are there costs that can be absorbed across some of our existing partners? How quickly can we move and set up supply outside of China? What is the actual cost impact for the goods when they actually land and start flowing into the wholesale channels? And so when that actually happens, we can point to all of the work and legwork that we've done on our side of the table within the realm of our responsibility as the brand owner. And then we bring that to the retailer and say, hey, look, this is where it's landed. And now it's a conversation with the merchant to figure out what is a reasonable impact. Because on both sides, we can't absorb, there's only so much a brand can absorb with regards to a margin hit. And there's only so much the retailer can absorb with regards to a margin hit. They can't have their shelves sit empty, and we can't fulfill orders if we're going to be losing money based off of the impact. So everything there isn't a black and white answer. Everything's up for negotiation, and it's a live conversation that's happening now. And we're hopefully going to land the planes. But again, going back to my previous comment, like nothing is totally definitive until, it's actually definitive.
Put Canopy to the side. Think about like generic 10, 20, $50 million brand that is kind of start dipping their toe into omnichannel. Is there a world where you would recommend like just stop, do it all direct for the time being? Like if you're limited on inventory, you don't want to start discounting, you don't want to get the half price, like be patient. Yeah, I see you nodding. I don't know what advice you would have there.
Yeah, I think, look, the working with retail partners it's a double-edged sword, right? It's an incredible unlock for scale. It's an incredible unlock for brand equity and momentum and credibility and all of that. But the flip of that is once you start, working with retail partners, you are now beholden because you've created this, this partnership, this relationship. And so it's really challenging then to make changes on the fly. I think, and again, I think what this is also very much, I'm going to keep highlighting this, but this is totally compounded by the fact that everything's so uncertain and there has been no time to really plan, digest, and react based off of some of these updates that are still, not totally clear on what's real and what's not. And so it's really hard to have these conversations with the retailers until you have that clarity. And so, to answer your question, Aaron, I would very much recommend for brands that are looking at retail as, a channel to open today, I would recommend slowing the roll. And maybe taking a pause until things are a little bit more clear with regards to tariff impact and what the long-term strategy needs to be for production to make margin, the margin work across the table.
I cannot think of a time when slow your roll isn't the right advice to begin with. So this is as good of a time as any.
Hey Justin, just double clicking on a question there. When a brand signs with Sephora or Target, do you automatically sign with the .com version of each of those, with Target.com and Sephora.com? So is that something that can be flexed into more of the dropship model where you get the brand's at least e-commerce traffic that's coming in without necessarily committing huge amounts of inventory to the retailer?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, actually, retailers in general are more, are easier to get into kind of just the .com distribution arrangement, and so certainly that's a path to consider. We, and a lot of the retailers are also seeing expansion in their .com distribution, and we know that that's certainly true for Target, is that they're leaning into growing their .com, and that's certainly a ripe opportunity to focus on that as a way in. With Sephora, actually, we were selling on .com exclusively for 2 years before we got the thumbs up to go in store with some of our products. So yeah, it's used as a way to kind of establish demand within their customer base before you start committing to distributing in physical retail.
Totally makes sense.
Prince, when you think about Pietra or even like factor quality, I think there's a difference. And Justin, even harkening back to something you were saying before, like the fact that people might work with Doris Dev or an agency or anything helps because, they're like a small brand, they're doing 1,000 things, they don't have the expertise. Prince, what is the benefit? Like, what is Pietra able to help a brand with? Or if you're a brand right now or you're talking to a brand right now and they're struggling, like what are the resources you would direct them to? Is it like Charles Cushing's community? Is it like operations communities? Like, how do you go figure out what the right strategy is? Like what are some tactical ideas?
Yeah, great question. Maybe just for like the 30-second background.
Please.
Pietra is a commerce enablement platform for consumer goods brands. Historically, it started as a sourcing marketplace, think kind of like an Alibaba 2.0, enabling starting and scaling brands to find factories across the world. And we actually met the Pietra team because as they were building out that initial factory network, they would leverage factor quality to audit and vet those factories across the world, and we would partner on behalf of a number of brands. Over time, Pietra went from not just being a sourcing marketplace to also opening up a fulfillment center. So Pietra actually runs 50,000 square feet of fulfillment fulfillment space based out of Statesville, North Carolina, that does D2C fulfillment, wholesale retail fulfillment as well. And now Factored Quality falls under the Pietra sourcing, QC, and production sort of umbrella. The best way to, right now, Aaron, as I'm sure you've seen, like every single commerce enablement company, from us to the Flexports of the world to, the Lubricants of the world to the ShipOps of the world, are all putting out content, infrastructure, webinars, just anything possible to try and support brands and merchants in the ecosystem. Well, obviously, to a certain extent, trying to also position oneself as like the authoritative figure in the space. I think this is where, I think during these sorts of times, it's actually where, let's call it nonpartisan entities become extra valuable. And so you alluded to this, but a friend of all of ours, Charles Cushing, runs a community called Startups, which is just a membership community of VPs of ops and supply chain across consumer brands, importers, retailers, and is really supposed to be a non-biased forum for operations leaders to be able to ask the, heavy hitting questions of who do you guys actually use for QC, for purchase order management, for post-purchase visibility and tracking across the commerce stack. I think it started more operations and sourcing and production kind of focused. Over time has become, commerce in general. So there's definitely a ton of resources there. I think the biggest mistake that a lot of people make is when they try and figure it out themselves. Like every niche of a product's lifecycle, from sourcing to quality to production to operations, customs, logistics, drayage, fulfillment, B2B fulfillment, D2C fulfillment, storage, omnichannel distribution, like are each their own world that you can untangle. And in every single one of those steps, there are, any number of commerce enablement companies like ours, like the Flexports of the world, like the Anvils of the world, that have built just for that space. So I don't know, if you're a brand listening to this, like go and chat with someone whose entire life and career has been dedicated to that part of the supply chain, and I'm sure at this point of time they will be more than willing to help you figure it out, au gratis.
Or just call Prince and you'll take care of, you'll walk him through it. Justin, I want to switch gears a little bit towards incubating companies, unless there's anything else you want to chime in on the like tariffs, fulfillment, ops side.
So burnt out about talking about tariffs.
Cool. Let's talk about the fun stuff.
Yeah. Wait, I'll say one last funny thing about the tariffs piece. I think this is worth shouting out. I saw the funniest tweet the other day from friend of the pod, Jeremy Kai, who I think we're all friends with. Jeremy Kai had the funniest tweet that was something like, "Wait until the world finds out who works in Italian factories." And I think this is like the funniest thing when you hear a lot of the rhetoric around redomesticating production or moving production into other countries. Setting up the infrastructure, like Justin talked about, is one piece of the equation. Actually getting people to work in these factories and show up every day and work, 2 shifts, 3 shifts is like an entire other question. So I thought worth mentioning there. Shout out to if you're listening.
We my watch company Modify, we moved all of our production to San Francisco, but we would still like produce components overseas, and then we would do like final printing and final assembly. I have my favorite one, which is my now almost 9-year-old giving me the middle finger when she was a baby. Middle finger.
Were you at the plant? You were doing assembly, by hand, final QA QC?
Dude, we did it all. We had we bought digital printers, and then we had a team of guys and gals who would assemble. But I remember going to the factory one time in Shenzhen, and I didn't speak the language, and I was a history major in MBA, so I could have been less useful. And I was like, this is not a waste of time. It was fascinating. It was amazing, right? It was so cool and so useless for me to be there. And so we definitely were the company which was, we're going to use Berkeley Sourcing Group. They're going to handle everything. They're going to advocate on our behalf, and just finding that trusted partner who could help figure it out. I couldn't agree more. That shit is hard, and a lot of people have solved it. I had not solved it. I didn't need to. I need to figure out what was our brand, what was our story. Justin, I want to talk about incubating companies. When you're Doris Dev, and I think it was Julia who introduced us in probably 2018 or 2017 about when I had just co-founded Passport Shipping.
And I was Julia who, Aaron?
Oh my God.
Julia Lipton?
Yes, sorry, Julia Lipton.
No way.
I think she's the one who also connected me with Chaz.
What's hilarious is Julia is also the one who connected me with Chaz, and then Chaz is the one who introduced me to Justin.
This is so funny. And Chaz couldn't even bother to show up today.
Shout out Julia.
Anyway, Julia's definitely not listening. She's on to bigger and better things than us and thinking about production. But yeah, I've followed your journey, right? And Doris Dev is shit, you want to get something built, built, you guys know how to do it. What was it that prompted you into like going deep and like doing the brand? Was it just this was a hit and you loved it and you were passionate? You know, it's like health and wellness, so it's like passionate about the space, or like go a little deeper in there.
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is we wanted to. There's a few things that happening all kind of simultaneously. My business partner Lucas and I, we were really interested in launching our own brand, and at the time we didn't have a specific idea that we felt totally motivated about leaning in. And so doing essentially what we knew how to do really well, which was engineer and then source and set up supply chain operations as a service, made sense for us to focus energy in the meantime. And kind of then in the background, we were able to explore different ideas while we were working with a ton of early stage brands and founders and folks in the space. And through that process, we actually were exploring a lot of different ideas. We were looking at different categories, different problems where we were like, hey, well, this is an interesting idea or approach that we could take within the category. And with Canopy, the genesis for the idea was actually very happenstance and opportunistic. Lucas's girlfriend at the time using a humidifier every day as a beauty hack for her skin. And she had this ritual of breaking out Q-tips and vinegar every weekend to clean it out so it wouldn't mold over. And that we thought that was like a really interesting prompt, that there's this product that somebody has a close relationship with that they use every day. They care enough to take action to clean it out and maintain it every week. And there wasn't a better mousetrap or version of the product that would solve, the pain points. And as we dug into it, we just realized there was a lot of surface area. There was, everybody had these stories about their humidifier. A lot of people didn't even know what a humidifier was, which also was kind of an interesting tidbit. A lot of people reacted really with like an aha when we told them that Izzy had been using it as a beauty hack for her skin. They were like, oh, that's so interesting. And it was this thing that was like, everybody thinks of a humidifier as like it's an elephant shaped thing in my baby's room, or it's this beige monstrosity that sits under the bed. And we're like, oh, there are all these things around the category that just make it interesting for us to kind of dive into, and realize there was an opportunity to make it better. And so there was like, hey, we created space and bandwidth for us to dive into a category of interest. That was like the first bit. Second, we found all of these like attributes that we thought were really interesting that resonated with people as we were going through that exploratory work. And then we were very like patient and opportunistic with our process. So we didn't rush anything because we were operating Doris Dev simultaneously. We had never raised any outside capital for any of the ideas, and it was a bootstrapped agency model. So we were very cash constrained on like testing and exploring what we were working on. So we had to be, that was by virtue of all that, we had to be very patient and opportunistic. But we spent basically a year doing R&D on what ultimately became the hero product for Canopy, which was this tech-enabled bedside humidifier that reduced maintenance or make maintenance super easy and reduce the mold from growing inside of a product that was like inherently something that everybody had problems with. And that was it. It was a year of patiently navigating, working through the R&D and building up enough confidence that we had stumbled into something that was worth pursuing. And then, and the process of that was really like talking to as many people as possible, putting the idea in front of as many trusted people as possible. And even the founders within our, that we were working with at Doris, those were some of the first conversations we had, actually to the point when we went and raised, a small angel round for Canopy. The first investors were actually founders and operators from the brands that we were working with at Doris Dev. And so I thought that was also like very confidence instilling and pointing us all in this direction that like, oh, we were onto something.
I want to pull on the thread of like what makes a great operator at like the early stages. But before I get there, just very quickly, when you first introduced Canopy on this call, you had a vision around it, but it seems like it really started as like, hey, look, there's a problem and like an itch we want to scratch. How quickly did you turn it into like a vision for a company with multiple products? Or was that like part of, hey, if we're going to raise money, we need to tell that? Or was it?
No, it's been it's kind of the same, I would say, same answer, which is very evolutionary. with regards to like where we started and where how it's grown and organically evolved. And a lot of it has to do with, I think, like, us as operators and us living in the world of product and agency work and all of that, is we can be reactive to feedback from our customers. We can be reactive to how the landscape is evolving within a certain category, and kind of be opportunistic with what we've created. So I think that's one of the big things, one of the big learnings and kind of attributes for Lucas and I as we've grown and scaled the businesses, is just, being very, very, very reactive and organically evolve and grow based off of kind of what we're learning and seeing.
Can I pull on a string there? Justin, do you think in 2025, to scale a consumer brand, let's call it, it's the couple million run rate, and start getting into scaling range, you have to go multi-product and you have to be a platform of products? Or do you think you can still say, really single SKU hero product in nature?
I think that it really depends on the product and the category. I will give you a different answer for different prompts.
Yeah.
I think there are certain products that have proven you can be hyper-focused, laser-focused on creating the perfect thing for this customer, and just focus on scaling that within a specific channel, within a specific audience, within a specific customer base.
What are examples that come to mind?
Like Athletic Greens, it is a product that has a very specific function and purpose that has resonated with a really wide customer base. They don't need to go and they can focus on just scaling this perfect product, or seemingly perfect product across all the categories, all the sectors, and really blow it out with that. But then there are other categories, as another example, we've looked at, where we worked with early days a baby brand called Lalo, and their launching of, initially it was one product line. We worked on a few of their initial products that they launched across really a few different categories within the baby space. But that's an example where they've scaled through diversification and expansion of their product assortment, product families. And that's because they've built out trust with an audience, and there's a ton of need for different products within the new parent space. And so they can continue to grow by launching new products because they've established that trust with their customer base.
Prince, the other example I was thinking about was Groons, which is just crushing it in subscription. And then you see every week, it's like, now we're on 100 Target stores, we're on 1,500 Target stores.
Totally.
Obviously, very similar with Athletic Greens. Listen, I was trying to think, I know Thuma has a broad range of products, but it felt like they scaled just to the moon through beds and frames, right? And that was that. And then, you're now in the bedroom, so you can sell other products. But I don't know, Prince, I feel like it depends if you're breaking down a category that's dated, and you can come in with something where it's look, we're going to build this hero product and we're just going to be better, cheaper, whatever the alchemy is with the right brand.
I think so much of this also is just an incremental trade-off question, right? Does new product introduction can mean one of two things, right? It can mean variants of your existing products. So for Canopy, doing a smaller canopy, a larger canopy, things like that. Or it can mean truly completely net new product introduction, new supply chain, new formulation, new compliance standards, new, logistics in certain cases. And I think so much of the question that this comes down to is the incremental effort, and Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, but is the incremental effort of bringing this net new product to market worth the juice on the other end of just doing a variant of the existing product, or getting into a completely new product category? Justin, I don't know what's the extent you're able to share, but have you been able to leverage Canopy's existing infrastructure to launch SKU number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the Canopy portfolio? Yeah,
and I think another dimension that's really important to think through is just do you have the credibility as a brand in whatever category A? If you're going to expand into category B, do you have the credibility?
Aaron, did we lose Justin?
We lost him, but Prince, you have the credibility.
Yeah, all good.
He was finally going to say something really exciting. No.
I think Justin was about to say, do you have the credibility to actually launch those incremental,
We'll see if he comes back. Actually, Prince, I want to turn to you, and then hopefully we'll come back to Justin if he can reconnect. Think about the brands from Factor Quality or today from Pietra that did a great job what are the attributes of the founders or the like operations team, if that's who you worked kind of most closely with, where you're like, I introduce you to a friend of a friend, she's starting a new physical product, like a new brand today, and you're like, yeah, she's going to make it. Like, what are the attributes where you look at people and you're like, okay, like, especially in like as dynamic of an environment as we're in?
Yeah, great question. I think so much of it like honestly comes down to knowing your customer, and just how obsessed are people with that customer. I often go back to an example. Actually, this is a brand started by a friend of mine from high school that's recently taken off, called Transcendence Coffee. Transcendence Coffee, and Aaron, I should introduce you to them. They're a small emerging brand based here in New York, and they were started by Justin. We have you?
Sorry, guys.
Cool.
You're in the box for 1 minute while Prince talks, and then I'll bring it back to you.
The question that Aaron had, Justin, was, what about operators of specific brands really make them stick out? And I was saying to Aaron, I think so much of this is about knowing your customer. And so the example I was giving is there's this emerging brand called Transcendence Coffee based here in New York, started by a friend of mine from high school. It was started by two women, Mitali and Lisa, who studied at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign together. And while they were doing their computer science degrees, they were both baristas on campus. And they both came from ethnic backgrounds. Mitali's Indian, Lisa is Lebanese. And one of the things that they saw missing in every coffee shop was most cafes, the ones that they worked at, used to be supplied by the company called Torini and something that makes like the caramel syrups and stuff like that, that were super high sugar content, really unhealthy, always made you crash after. And so Mitali and Lisa, while they were both working at their respective companies, Lisa was at Target as a software engineer, Mitali is at Apple. They had this idea to say, hey, we think that we can create a new brand that's a retail first distributed modern coffee supplier, a coffee syrup supplier with ethnic flavors, with better for you ingredients, and then have later gone direct to consumer. And I think the reason that they've now scaled, they've just signed some massive partnerships with large distributors across the US, coffee shops. And I think one of the really interesting reasons is they started by taking a very unorthodox approach. During a time when everyone was going D2C first, they started by saying, hey, we're actually going to start by distributing through coffee shops, through Blank Street and through, Cologne, La Colombe and all these other coffee shops. And only then will we build our D2C presence. And I think just so much of that intelligence comes down to like knowing your customer and being able to speak the language of your customer. And in their case, they were selling and building a product for themselves, for other baristas that they would have, wanted to build for.
I love it. Justin, we'll come back in a second to the previous prompt, but like here, anything when you're, the prompt is like, I introduce you to a friend of a friend and you're like, man, she's going to crush it as a founder of like a physical product company. Like, what are the other attributes? Like being absolutely close to customers. Is it like financial savvy? Is it exploring every part of it? Is it actually staying in their lane? Like, is there anything else that stands out?
I think there's a few attributes that are like really critical. One is like relentlessness. Like, if you're so passionate about a problem, you need to have this relentlessness that you're going to pursue it until you get it across the finish line to the fidelity of like where it needs to be. Another is curiosity. Like you don't accept not understanding something. You're going to keep digging deeper and deeper. And then on the attribute for a capital edge or a distribution edge, I think there's like something that you typically founders bring to the table, which is a competitive advantage around either having an insight into the problem that not everyone has, or some type of competitive advantage around like distribution, or realizing, hey, there's a white space or an opportunity to go distribute these coffee syrups into coffee shops because that's a pain point that everybody's experiencing and nobody's like addressing it, And so like just being able to recognize and lean into what that might be as a competitive edge that you might bring to the table is really,
Thank you.
Can I ask a maybe slightly contentious question to Justin, Aaron, just teasing off of that, okay? So Justin, I feel like from 2015 through 2020, let's call it like wave one of D2C, you had a lot of very creative marketing type of folks who were leading and starting these brands. And over the last few years, it seems like there's almost been a course correction where you have a lot of folks who come from banking backgrounds, operations backgrounds, who are, now at the helm of a lot of these companies. I feel like one archetype of founder leans itself to kind of be better suited to scaling than the other, or what are kind of the trade-offs that you've seen?
No, I think that's that's like the kind of fill in the blank competitive advantage that different founders bring to the table. So on the Doris Dev side, I've had like the ultimate privilege of working with founders from all different backgrounds across working on really cool problems and bringing totally unique perspective on how they approach it. I would say those first two attributes I mentioned are pretty universal for those that are, going to succeed within with what they're doing, which is relentlessness and curiosity. But then the competitive advantage is like fill in the blank. Like we've worked with founders that came from banking, worked with founders that came from performance marketing, editorial and storytelling, creating content, folks that came from the product world. Like there isn't a silver bullet approach to that. But what they all do bring is like, I have this unique perspective and insight from the experience that I've had, and I can lean in and use that as my competitive advantage, as my wedge in for whatever, thing that they're going to be working on. And we've seen that there isn't like a, hey, you have to have this profile in order to be successful. In fact, with Canopy, what I'll point to is when we were working on Canopy for that year internally at Doris Dev, and then ultimately gearing up for our launch, Lucas and I realized we needed to bring in a third co-founder that really would lead the marketing efforts, because our backgrounds were in product, design, manufacturing, business operations, but like we didn't have the experience of like crafting the brand and figuring out how we were going to prioritize marketing budgets and what tactics to work and what channels to promote through. And so we were like, we needed to bring in a third co-founder, and we knew that this person was going to ultimately lead marketing and be the CMO, but we didn't know the profile of this person. So we actually narrowed it down to 3 different profiles for this CMO that we wanted to find. And the 3 profiles were basically either like a performance marketing maven, so somebody that was super analytical, that knew how to navigate through Meta and Google and all of the advertising landscape and would figure out, how to optimize our funnel and our approach there. The other was like somebody that came from like creative brands, agency world, that knew how to build beautiful brands that resonated really strongly with an audience. And maybe that would be a really interesting angle for the CMO to have. And then the third was really like editorial storytelling, somebody that knew how to, craft a story, create the story that would resonate really strongly with a target audience. And typically that's somebody that either came from like the content world, had built their own audience, came from the editorial world. But those were 3 different profiles, and we spoke to candidates that we loved across all 3 of those profiles. And it wasn't clear which one of those profiles would be like the perfect person to bring on as our third co-founder for Canopy. Ultimately, we were very lucky in that we found somebody who I would say led with really brand and storytelling, that had a little bit exposure and experience across all 3 of those pillars. Luckily, that person is Eric, who came on as our third co-founder and is our CMO today and has been an incredible partner and leader within the organization. But at the time, it was like we weren't sure, and it wasn't clear like who we should be focused, what kind of profile we should be looking at to bring on as our co-founder.
Maybe the takeaway, Aaron, is apart from knowing your customer, there's probably a second piece, right, which is like knowing yourself and knowing what your what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and then building out your executive team or other co-founding team around your weaknesses as a brand founder.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the same tech. It's the same anywhere, right? It's like, you can't do it yourself. Like, what are the gaps you want to fill? I also think there's something to be said, depending on the stage of the company, for what fires you're going to fight, what fires you're going to let burn, which is always a hard discussion. Guys, we're at the hour. This was awesome. Last question. Where can people find you? What's your preferred, I don't know, like, follow, smash, subscribe, ads? Yeah. Prince, you first.
You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Just reach out, shoot me an email, prince@factoredquality.com. And yeah, just excited thanks for having us on and excited to chat.
Thank you. And yes. Justin, how about yourself?
Mine's probably LinkedIn, best place to find me. Smash that subscribe button.
We're just a bunch of olds. It's just LinkedIn. Yeah. It's like, you see me on TikTok, don't worry.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you. I took a bunch of notes. This was really fun. I appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Aaron.
Always
Take
fun.
care. Bye, everyone.